Before we get into this story, let me just mention that life doesn't always unfold the way you anticipate. Sometimes, the people who enter your life aren't there to follow society's norms, and occasionally you find yourself overwhelmed by emotions you never knew existed. That's exactly what occurred to me. Looking back now, I'm not particularly proud of it, but it helped shape who I am today. I wasn't ready for how a single decision could lead to a chain of secrets, confusion, and remorse. To make things even more complex, it was with someone I could never admit my feelings for, my younger brother. Let me explain before you make any assumptions. I grew up in a family that wasn't especially close. We were polite, yes, but not overly affectionate. My brother, Liam, was 5 years younger than me. For much of my childhood, we were in entirely separate worlds. I was focused on high school while he was still watching cartoons. I was off to college while he was entering his awkward teenage phase. But when I returned home after graduation, something changed. Liam wasn't the shy, awkward child I remembered. He had grown up, and suddenly, he wasn't just my little brother anymore. He was intelligent, kind, and surprisingly charismatic. At first, I thought I was imagining things. How could I be so drawn to someone I had practically helped raise? But the feeling was there, undeniable and inescapable. One evening, we were sitting in the backyard under the stars, simply chatting. It began innocently enough, reminiscing about childhood moments, teasing each other about silly things we used to do. But then he said something that left me speechless. You know, I've always looked up to you, Liam said softly, but lately I feel like I see you differently. I didn't know how to respond. My heart was racing, and not in the way it should have been. I nervously laughed and tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, but his words lingered in the air between us. That was the beginning. What Liam said that night was innocent enough, but it opened a door I couldn't shut. Over the following weeks, things only grew more complicated, and I began to feel emotions I had no right to experience. After that night under the stars, I tried to convince myself that Liam's words didn't mean anything, that he was just being nostalgic, maybe even a little awkward. But deep down, I couldn't shake the way he looked at me, as if I was someone more than his older sister. I occupied myself with work, job applications, friends, anything to keep my mind distracted. But somehow, Liam always found a way to be near me. He would stop by my room to talk about his day, hang around the kitchen while I cooked, and sit a little too close when we watched TV together. And I let him. At first, I told myself I was overthinking it. Families are supposed to be close, right? But this wasn't just closeness. It was tension, an unspoken pull between us that I was too afraid to acknowledge, but too weak to resist. The tipping point came on a rainy Sunday afternoon. It had been pouring all day, and we were both stuck inside, bored and restless. Liam suggested we play a card game like we did when we were kids. You've got no chance, I teased, trying to keep things light. We'll see about that, he replied with a grin. As we played, the jokes and laughter began to feel different. Every touch of his hand as he passed me, the cards felt intentional. Every glance lingered a little too long. My heart was pounding, and it wasn't because of the game. At one point, I reached across the table to grab the deck, and our hands brushed. It was such a small moment, but it felt like electricity. I froze, and so did he. We locked eyes, and for a second, it felt like time had stopped. You feel it too, don't you? He asked quietly. I didn't know how to answer. Denying it felt like a lie, but admitting it would change everything. I don't know what you're talking about, I whispered, pulling my hand back and standing up quickly. But Liam wasn't letting it go. He followed me into the living room, his expression serious. Don't do that, he said. Don't pretend this isn't happening. It's wrong, I blurted out. We can't. This isn't. We can't feel this way. Why not? He challenged. I know what we're supposed to be, but I can't help how I feel, and I don't think you can either. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I felt like I was being torn in two directions, and no matter which way I went, someone would get hurt. I told Liam we couldn't talk about it anymore, but the damage was already done. The lines had been blurred, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't undo what I felt. After that confrontation, things between Liam and me became more complicated. We never spoke directly about what had happened, but it was always there, simmering just below the surface. Every glance, Every word, every moment we spent together felt charged, as if we were dancing around something we couldn't name. I tried to act normal, but normal didn't exist anymore. If I spent too much time with Liam, I felt guilty, like I was walking a tightrope and could fall at any moment. If I avoided him, it felt like I was ripping a part of myself away. The hardest part was, he wasn't making it easy to keep my distance. Liam started finding reasons to spend more time together. He'd offer to help with errands, suggest we watch a movie, or just hang out in my room. And the worst part was, I wanted him there. One evening, we were watching a movie in the living room. It was some romantic drama, but neither of us was really paying attention. The lights were dim, and the rain outside added a quiet backdrop to the scene. I don't even remember what started it, but at some point I rested my head on Liam's shoulder. It was such a small, innocent gesture, but it felt like crossing a line. He didn't move, didn't say a word, but I could feel the tension in the air. "You're making this really hard," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What am I making hard?" I asked, pretending not to understand. I knew precisely what he meant as he said, gesturing vaguely between us. "There is no us," I replied, pulling away. "There can't be." "Then why does it feel like there is?" he asked. I didn't have an answer. Instead, I stood up and mumbled something about being tired before heading to my room. I thought that would be the end of it for the night, but I was mistaken. Later, there was a knock on my door. "Liam, I'm really not in the mood." "It's important," he interrupted, his voice strong. I hesitated, then opened the door. He stepped inside, closing it behind him. For a moment, we just stood there, the silence between us heavy and awkward. "I don't care what anyone else thinks," he said, looking directly at me. "I care about what you think, about what you feel." "I can't do this," I replied, my voice breaking. "It's not just about us. There are consequences. There's our family, our lives, everything we've built. It's not fair." "Fair doesn't matter," he said, stepping closer. "I'm not asking you to do anything right now. I'm just asking you to be honest. Do you feel it too?" His question lingered in the air, demanding an answer I wasn't ready to give. Admitting the truth would mean everything would change. There would be no going back. But how long could I keep deceiving myself and him? I stood there, frozen, his question hanging between us like a weight I couldn't bear. My heart was racing, and every rational thought in my brain screamed at me to say no, to end this once and for all. But I couldn't. "Liam," I started, my voice trembling. "I can't. I don't know." "That's not an answer," he said softly, his eyes searching mine. For a moment, I felt completely exposed. The truth was, I did feel it. Every moment we spent together, every glance, every word, it all felt different now. But how could I say that out loud? How could I admit something so wrong, something that could destroy everything we knew? "I can't do this," I whispered, looking away. "You already are," he replied. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned away, desperate to put some space between us. But even as I did, I felt him take a step closer, closing the gap. "Please," he said, his voice breaking. "Just be honest with me. I need to know I'm not crazy." I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that this was all in his head. But the words wouldn't come. The silence between us was deafening, and in that moment, I knew I couldn't keep pretending. "I don't know what I feel," I said finally, my voice barely audible. "But whatever this is, it can't happen. It's not right." Liam didn't argue. Instead, he nodded slowly, his expression a mix of heartbreak and understanding. "I'm not going to push you," he said, "but I'm here, and I think you know how I feel." With that, he left, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The next few days were a blur. I threw myself into work, into anything that could keep me busy and distracted. But no matter what I did, I couldn't stop thinking about Liam. It didn't help that he wasn't giving me much space. He kept showing up in the little moments, bringing me coffee in the morning, casually sitting next to me at dinner, brushing against me as he passed by. Every interaction felt like a test, like he was waiting for me to say something, to do something. And then there was the notebook. One evening, I found a small journal left on the coffee table. At first, I thought it was mine, but when I opened it, I realized it was Liam's. It was filled with sketches, notes, and little bits of poetry, things I never knew he did. But what caught my attention was a page near the back. It wasn't labeled, but as I read it, I felt my heart sink. It was about me. He had written about how he saw me, not just as his sister, but as someone he admired, someone he couldn't stop thinking about. It was raw and honest, and it scared me. I knew I shouldn't have read it. I knew I should have put it down and walked away, but I couldn't. Every word felt like it was pulling me deeper into a place I wasn't sure I could escape from. That journal changed everything. It wasn't just feelings anymore. It was real, written in ink, impossible to ignore. And the more I tried to fight it, the more it felt like I was losing control. I spent the entire night staring at that journal, my mind spinning in a million different directions. Part of me wanted to confront Liam, to demand an explanation. But another part of me knew exactly what he'd say. The words in that journal were everything I had been avoiding. They weren't just about admiration or sibling closeness. They were about longing, about love. And as much as I didn't want to admit it, they mirrored feelings I had been burying for weeks. The next morning, I avoided him completely. I couldn't face him, not after what I'd read. But Liam wasn't someone you could avoid for long. By evening, he found me sitting in the backyard, staring blankly at the horizon. "You've been quiet all day," he said, taking a seat next to me. "I've just been thinking," I replied, trying to sound casual. "About what?" he asked, his tone cautious but curious. I hesitated, my fingers nervously picking at the edge of my sweater. "I found your journal." I admitted that I hadn't looked at him for a moment. There was a pause, and then I heard him exhale sharply. "I didn't mean for you to see that," he said quietly. "I understand," I replied, "but I did, and now I'm uncertain about what to do." "What about?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "About us," I said, finally turning to look at him. His expression was a mix of fear and hope, and it broke my heart. "I don't want to make things more difficult for you," he said, "but I can't pretend I don't feel what I feel. I've tried, and it's impossible. I don't know if I can do this," I said. "It's too much. It's too complicated." "It doesn't have to be," he said, reaching for my hand. "We don't have to figure everything out right now. I just need to know if you feel the same way." I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him that this was all a mistake and that we could go back to the way things were, but I couldn't lie anymore. "Yes," I whispered, barely able to say the word. "But that doesn't mean it's right." That admission set off a chain of events I couldn't stop. Over the next few weeks, Liam and I danced around our feelings, never crossing a line, but never fully stepping away from it either. Every conversation, every shared moment felt like walking on a tightrope, one wrong move away from falling. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late, and the rest of the house was asleep. I was in the kitchen, unable to sleep, when Liam walked in. "You're up late," he said, grabbing a glass of water. "I couldn't sleep," I replied, avoiding his gaze for a moment. Neither of us said anything, then he set the glass down and turned to me. "We need to talk about this," I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "About this," he said, gesturing between us. "I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. I need to know where we stand." "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't know what to do, Liam. Every part of me is telling me this is wrong, but I can't stop feeling what I feel." "Then stop fighting it," he said, stepping closer. "I can't," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "It's too much. It's too dangerous." "Then let me make it simple," he said, his voice steady. "Do you want me to walk away? Because if that's what you need, I'll do it. I'll walk away and I'll never bring this up again. But if you want me to stay..." Liam's ultimatum left me speechless. He was offering me a way out, but was it what I wanted? I had to make a decision, and I knew that whatever I chose, there would be no going back. Liam's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. He stood there, waiting for my answer, his eyes locked on mine. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. This was it, the moment everything would change, one way or another. "Liam," I began, my voice shaking, "I don't want to lose you, but I don't know how we can make this work without destroying everything." His expression softened, but his resolve didn't waver. "I'm not asking for everything to be figured out right now," he said. "I'm just asking you to choose. Do you want me to stay or not?" Tears welled up in my eyes. I wanted to say no, to tell him to walk away so we could pretend this never happened. But the truth was, I couldn't bear the thought of losing him. "I don't want you to go," I whispered. For a moment, he looked as though he couldn't believe what he just heard. Then, without saying a word, he stepped closer and wrapped his arms around me. It wasn't romantic or suggestive. It was just comfort, safety, and understanding. "We'll figure it out," he said quietly, "one step at a time." The days that followed were a strange mix of relief and fear. Liam and I became more careful around others, hyper aware of how our interactions might be perceived. At the same time, we started finding moments where we could talk openly without the weight of secrecy crushing us. But the peace didn't last long. Secrets have a way of coming to light, and ours was no exception. One evening, while Liam and I were talking in hushed tones on the back porch, our older cousin Ellie walked out unexpectedly. We froze, startled, unsure of how much she had overheard. "What's going on here?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "Nothing," I said quickly, too quickly. Ellie wasn't stupid. She looked at both of us, her gaze sharp and probing. "You two have been acting strange for weeks," she said. "Don't tell me it's nothing." Liam started to say something, but I cut him off. "We've just been spending more time together, that's all," I said, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, and that's what's weird," Ellie replied. "You two were never this close before. What changed?" I felt panic rising in my chest. Ellie was the last person we wanted to suspect anything. She was blunt, observant, and had no problem calling people out. "Nothing changed," I said, forcing a laugh. "We're just getting along better these days." Ellie didn't look convinced, but she dropped the subject for the moment. Later that night, Liam and I sat in my room, the tension between us palpable. "She knows something's up," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We'll handle it," Liam replied. "How?" I asked, my voice breaking. "This is already hard enough without someone sniffing around. What if she figures it out? What if she tells someone?" "We'll figure it out," he said firmly. "But I'm not walking away just because things are getting difficult." His determination was comforting, but it didn't erase the fear gnawing at me. Ellie wasn't someone who let things go, and I knew it was only a matter of time before she started asking questions again. The walls were closing in, and I could feel the weight of our secret pressing down harder than ever. Liam and I had made our choice, but could we survive the consequences?